Hi everyone, so I want to show you how I made Barbara Maitland from Beetlejuice. This is when they're trying to scare the family out of their house, the Deetzes, and she's like pulled her mouth open and got that massive mouth because they're going to go and scare the Deetzes. And so first of all what I did was started off by rolling up some foil and shaping that so it was the rough shape of the mouth. And sorry about that, I was just putting my hot glue gun on. And so what I'm doing here is basically making a sort of crocodile mouth, because that's roughly the shape it is. And then once I'd got that basic shape down, then it's a case of layering to thicken that up, because the more I can make this out of foil, the less clay I'll use, because I like to be quite economical with the amount of clay. I find it doesn't affect the overall sturdiness of the model afterwards, but it just means I save a bit of money because I can make my clay last a bit longer. So just several layers, just to make it so you basically want enough layers so it feels fairly rigid on its own, because then when you put the clay on over the top, it's going to be nice and strong once it's been fired. Here I'm just working out these the side of her stretched mouth. I'm just working out how exactly I wanted to do that with the clay. So I'm just using the foil to get those rough shapes in place. And at first I was going to wrap the foil round, but then obviously it will keep moving and falling off, which is where obviously the hot glue gun comes in. I find it's useful for attaching the bits of foil, and I know later on obviously the model's going to be fired in the oven, but as long as the whole thing's covered in clay and the clay is well attached, even if the hot glue melts on the inside that's holding the foil armature together, it won't affect the model, it'll be fine. And what I did is when I fired it in the oven, I made sure there was a ball of foil underneath the bottom of the mouth to make sure that the mouth didn't sag or anything. So here I'm just using the hot glue just to stick the layers of foil together, and I'm just making that rough head shape. And then you'll see in a bit what I do is roll up some more foil to make a rough shoulder shape, because I'm just making like a little miniature bust of Barbara. And then I'll attach those two pieces together with hot glue, and that gives me the basis of my miniature bust. And it's, like I said, it's just going to save on clay, and also foil's fairly, I mean, this roll of foil is like, I think I paid 50p for it at my local supermarket, something like that. It's probably even less than that. So, you know, it's nice and cheap and an easy thing to use. You can just make the model out of foil and then put a layer of paper mache over the top, if you haven't got Sculpey clay. I used to do that a lot. I'd just make it out of paper mache instead. It just takes a couple of layers, and you have to wait in between for it to dry. Whereas what I like about using the Sculpey is the fact that it's only half an hour in the oven and it's like ready to go. It's just a case of letting it cool for about 5-10 minutes, and then I can paint it the same day, which is also why I don't tend to use the epoxy sculpt as much, because of having to leave it for 24 hours to set. I like to be able to start and finish something in the same day if it's small like this. So as you can see, I've got the basic shape for the armature, and now what I'm going to do is just make a little wooden stand to stick that onto. And then it's a case of coating the whole thing in a layer of clay, and then sculpting into the clay the details. So what I'm doing here is I'm pressing in the lower edge of the clay to form the gum line, because the way her mouth is stretched, you've got like the mouth is really stretched and sort of almost pulled back, and then the gums are really showing. So I'm just defining the edges of the mouth by just pressing in with my clay tool just to create that shape, so you can see the like sort of skin stretched over the overly expanded mouth. I'm also here and there removing bits of clay where the clay was a bit thick and the shape wasn't quite right. If I did this again, I think what I'd do is put slightly less foil on the ends of the mouth and then just build it up a little bit gradually with the clay and make it a little bit more pointed, but never mind, it worked out all right in the end. So here I am then adding lines and creases. This is because the skin is like really stretched, so there's lots of sort of wrinkles where it's all folded up on itself and little sort of stretches and pull marks, and I'm doing that same texture all over the skin, and I use the same texture on the gums as well because everything is stretched. And obviously I didn't want anything to be like perfectly smooth, I wanted lots of texture in the piece as well. And then for the teeth, what I did was I rolled little balls of clay, pressed them into place, and then just shaped them with my clay tool. And here I'm working on the tongue. To make the eyes, by the way, I just cut out the slits into the head of the figure to create the eye holes, because obviously her eyes are inside her mouth on her tongue. And then I just added a little piece where the nose would be, like to make it look all stretched out, and just made stretched out nostrils by pressing in with my clay tool. So here what I'm doing is shaping the tongue. Unfortunately it's just slightly off camera, but it will be back on camera in a minute. So as you can see, I've put that like ridge down the middle, like so. And then I'm using little dotting motions to add texture to the tongue. And I'll just zoom in so you get a little bit of a better view of it. So just random little dots, just with the very tip of my clay tool, to add the sort of texture to the tongue, because tongues do have a texture to them. Obviously they've got lots of little taste buds on them and stuff. Now I know obviously taste buds are raised bumps, but this works just as well in a model this size. And I just did that all over the tongue, and then later on I'll make that show up a bit more by putting a dark colour on first and then putting like a lighter wash over the top, so that those little bumps and textures show up later on in the sculpture. And as you can see on the inside of the mouth, I've created little ridges by just scoring into it with the clay tool to create the ridges on the inside of the mouth, and I did that on the upper palate as well as the lower one. And then I rolled two little balls for the eyes. And obviously they go on the back of the tongue. And because of the size, I just did these very simply. So it's just two balls of clay, and then you'll see me press into the middle of them with a ball stylus in a minute. This is me just marking out where the pupils are going to go. I didn't bother putting like the blue of her eyes on or anything, not at this scale. So literally later on you'll see me just paint these white and then put black dots in the holes in the middle for the pupils. And then I'm just working how I want the tongue to bend and shape. And here I was figuring out how to position the tongue and where I wanted it to be. I did change this, you'll see me take it out in a bit and then reposition it. And I also opened the mouth a little wider because the mouth wasn't open as much as I originally wanted. And then just bending and twisting the tongue to whatever shape I wanted. And then just moving the tongue forward a little bit because it was a bit too far back, so the eyes were a bit too obscured. I wanted it to, you know, when she's talking, you can see in the film that like the tongue sort of bends up. So I wanted those little curls and bends into the tongue, like in the film. And then it's a case of placing that in place. You can put some, bacon bond on the tongue before putting it into place. What I did is I just used my clay tool to make sure I pressed it down well and pressed in the centre. And it did stay in place quite well, but obviously if you're not sure, just add a bit of bacon bond and it'll stay in place perfectly fine. And then just readjusted the pupils of her eyes because they'd got squished a little bit with me messing about with the placement of the tongue. And then just redefining any shapes and edges that I needed to do. And then just touching up the textures and getting them in the right position. And then I baked this on 130 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. And when it came out, it was fully set, and then it was time to start painting. So once I got the base layers down, so that basic skin tone, basic hair colour, eye colour, like the eye hole colour, teeth and everything, then what I did was I applied a sort of brown wash over the inside of the mouth to make the ridges stand out. Then I went around and touched up the teeth. This was the fiddliest part because obviously I had to paint both sides of the teeth and the top. Otherwise it's quite easy to see any little missed areas. And obviously I wanted the teeth to stand out because they're one of the most sort of observable features of Barbara's face when she's got this, when she's created this like monster mouth. And because I put texture into the teeth using my clay tool, obviously the texture shows up a bit better once I've painted the teeth, because then you can see the little indents in the teeth to create like the biting surface of the teeth. It's a bit fiddly painting around the tongue, but just a nice tiny paintbrush did the trick. And ignore the shape, the shade of her clothing at the moment. That was just me just painting like a base layer underneath, and then I'm going to stick some fabric over the top for the outfit. I haven't got exactly what she wears in the film or anything, but I've got something that would look like something Barbara would wear. And what I did for the hair is I put like a sort of flat piece on first in the rough shape of her hair, like the hairline and everything. And then I'd made lots of little snakes of clay and laid those over the top because her hair's quite curly. And that's how I created the texture in her hair. You have to excuse my voice if my voice goes a bit. I'm losing my voice for some reason at the moment. Don't know why, I haven't got a cold. And then I dry brushed a lighter skin tone over the top. I did actually go over this a little bit because I didn't like it, but what I'm doing is I put a base layer of like a flesh tone on, and then dry brush over the top with a very pale version. And basically it's the same colour but with a load of white mixed into it. I wanted to make the creases and the wrinkles show up. And I also added a little bit of pink. Even though it looks alright on camera, she did turn out a bit sort of orangey almost, like a bit ochre-y. There was a bit too much ochre in my mixture. And then I added some pink and white to make a colour to dry brush over the gums, just to make the wrinkles and things in the gums show up a bit more. I didn't quite take enough paint off my brush, so it does apply quite a big layer, but I find if I just apply it very gently, just with the very tip of the brush, and then just wipe off any excess with my fingers, that worked just fine. So I did that to the gums, did it to the face. I wanted to make that texture pop, make it show up a bit more. And I also did a grey colour that I dry brushed, well I say dry brushed, that I went over the hair with. I didn't quite wipe off as much as I would have done normally for dry brushing, but it worked out alright. And I just used that to make the texture of the hair show up a bit more. I did go over this a little bit later on with a bit more black just to tone it down a little bit, just like a black wash over the top later on because it looked a bit too grey, and then obviously touched up anywhere where I got the grey colour on the skin. If you're fairly quick, you can wipe it off with a baby wipe and then apply another layer, or just go over it with another layer of flesh tone. And here what I'm doing as well is where the dry brushing was a bit too thick on the skin, I'm just rubbing that off with the baby wipe just to tone it down and blend it in a bit more, so it's not like big blobs of sort of a lighter skin tone in random areas. And then once the sculpture had dried, I glued on some fabric for the top, and that's it. That's how I made my Barbara sculpture from Beetlejuice. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.